Welcome to the Unfettered Speech Podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Leonard Goodman.
Len, it's always good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Pat. And we have a very special guest today that we're excited about, and that's John Kiriakou, an author and former CIA officer who holds the sad distinction of being, I believe, the only person sent to prison in connection with the CIA torture program. And he went to prison not because he participated in it, which he did not, but because he gave an interview, and he can explain this better, but basically gave an interview to ABC News, which confirmed the existence of an official torture program. So let's bring on John Kiriakou and get to the bottom of this. Welcome, John.
Thanks,
Great
gents.
to have you.
Good to see you both. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So do I have that right? And we want to go through this a little bit. We only have an hour, so we don't want to. I know you've talked about this so many times.
Sure.
You were a CIA officer. You had captured or helped capture a targeted detainee named Abu Zubaydah, and were using conventional interrogation methods to get information from him. Maybe you could take the story from there and give us a sort of a short version of your interrogation and what happened with that conventional interrogation of Abu Zubaydah.
You bet.
Okay.
We captured Abu Zubaydah in Faisalabad, Pakistan in late March of 2002. And I spent the first 56 consecutive hours with him. I was instructed by George Tenet, the director of the CIA, not to leave his bedside. I was afraid I'd fall asleep, frankly, so I tore up a sheet and I tied him to the bed just in case I nodded off and he was able to physically, get up out of the bed. He wasn't. He had been shot 3 times. A Pakistani policeman shot him with an AK-47 and hit him in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach. But I recognized at the time as I was sitting there in his hospital room that this was a unique opportunity. And I was going to try to engage him in conversation. So I did. And he was talkative. We talked about Islam versus Christianity. He recited poetry to me that he had written. We talked about his family. He was very upset. He cried a lot. He said he would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. We talked about 9/11 briefly. He said he never wanted Al-Qaeda to attack the United States on 9/11. He wanted to attack Israel. And like I say, the whole point is you engage a person in conversation. You treat them with respect, and they respond to you. Now, he was taken off after these 56 hours. He was taken off to a secret site, a secret CIA prison. And after spending 6 weeks just recuperating from his gunshot wounds, he was interrogated by Ali Soufan, an FBI agent of Egyptian origin, who engaged him both in Arabic and in English. Now, I've said this a number of times, and I say it only half jokingly. It's like a kick in my gut to have to compliment the FBI. But if there's one thing that the FBI is really, really good at, it's interrogations. They've been doing them since the Nuremberg trials in 1945 and 1946. They have discovered through thousands of hours of practice that the only way to get suspects to talk to you is to treat them with respect. You engage them in a conversation. Perhaps you offer them a cup of coffee or tea, a cigarette, an orange, whatever. You ask them about their families. You engage them in a conversation, and eventually they're going to open up to you. Now, it may take a day, a month, it may take a year, but eventually they're going to open up to you. At the CIA, we were not in any way trained or instructed in interrogations. And after Zubaydah had been with Ali Soufan and the FBI at the secret site for a number of months, the CIA for reasons that have never been explained, were able to get President Bush to order the FBI out of the secret site. They left the entire country, not just the secret site, because they knew exactly what the CIA was going to do, and they wanted no part of it. They didn't even want FBI personnel in the same country where the torture was taking place. And so as soon as the FBI left, the CIA began torturing Abu Zubaydah mercilessly, I might add, using techniques that had never been approved by the White House or by the Justice Department. They were just winging it, Russian roulette, and putting him in a coffin and throwing cockroaches in there with him because he had this irrational fear of insects, giving him enemas using hummus. They forced hummus into his rectum. They did all kinds of terrible things to him. They held a drill next to his head and threatened to drill a hole through his head. They threatened to kill his family members, all kinds of different things.
Were you present for any of this,
No.
John?
No, I wasn't. I had been promoted when I got back to headquarters. I was the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. And so in that position, I had access to literally everything that the CIA was doing around the world. And these cables were coming into a top secret compartment. And I was reading them as they were coming in, and then reading cables from CIA officers who were there saying, "Hey, I never signed up for this. I never said that I would participate in this." Or we had doctors on site that said, "Wait a minute, I took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. And you want me to do what? You want me to stand by to revive the guy after you kill him so that you can torture him more?" And I thought, well, thank God I'm not the only person that's against this. But then nobody ever said anything.
Well,
The cables
can we ask,
broke out.
John, because what people always say about whistleblowers, well, you didn't have to go to the press, you didn't have to talk to the press, you could have. There's official channels.
Right. The
If
official channels. May I
Right.
tell you about my official channels?
Please.
Because my official channels created the CIA's torture program. Number one, I worked in the CIA's counterterrorism center. They invented torture. Number two, where do I go from there? The inspector general? Guess what? The inspector general's not read into the compartment. He didn't even know that torture was taking place. Number three, the general counsel. The general counsel was the one who approved the torture program. Can't go to the Justice Department because the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel was the one that said that it was legal and allowed the CIA to carry out its torture program. Then where? You go to the National Security Council? Guess what? They're the ones that asked for the torture program. And then there are the oversight committees, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. They were the ones that approved and funded the torture program. So then where do you go? You go to the media. It's the only place you can go because everybody is part of the problem. And so I just love it when people say, oh, chain of command. Yeah, tell me about the chain of command, since these people seem to know so much about the chain of command. Yeah, it was the chain of the command that was the criminals in the CIA.
So what happened after you? So tell us a little bit about, you gave an interview. What year was this?
Yeah,
So-
well, I left the CIA in 2004.
Okay.
And I went into the private sector. I have 5 children, wanted to make some money to put the kids through college. And I thought, surely somebody is going to come forward and say something. And indeed, somebody came forward. We don't know who, but somebody came forward and talked about the secret prisons. There was a woman who was accused of releasing the information on the secret prisons. And she was escorted out of the White House, but never charged with a crime. They couldn't prove that it was her. If it was, kudos to her. Congratulations. That was a very heroic thing to do. But I waited for somebody to say something, and nobody did. And so I resigned, and I went into the private sector. Finally, 3.5 years after I resigned, I got a call from Brian Ross at ABC News, who said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. I said I've never laid a hand on Abu Zubaydah or on any other prisoner. And I had never spoken to a journalist before, so I didn't know it was an old reporter's trick to say, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. So I said I'd think about it. That week, President Bush gave a press conference in which one of the reporters asked him about these rumors that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. And he looked in the camera and he said, "We do not torture," like that. And I remember saying to my wife, who was also a senior CIA officer, I said, "He's a bald-faced liar. He's looking the American people in the eye and he's lying to them." And then a few days after that, on Friday, he walked out of the South Portico of the White House toward the helicopter to go to Camp David for the weekend. And a reporter shouted a question about torture. And he stopped and turned and said, "Well, if there is torture, it's because of a rogue CIA officer." And I told my wife, Brian Ross's sources at the White House, and they're going to try to pin this on me. So I called him and I said, "I'll give you your interview." And I decided in the, whatever it was, 4 or 5 days between that call and the actual interview, that I would tell the truth. Regardless of what the questions were, I was going to tell the truth and just let the cards fall. And so I did. I said 3 things. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president. And then all hell broke loose.
Now, the CIA torture program, do you have knowledge of this? So my recollection is there were 2 contractors that were hired, Jessen and I forget the other fellows.
Mitchell and Jessen.
Mitchell and Jessen. Is
Yeah.
that something that you were aware of, that those people coming in?
Yeah. In fact, on their first day, well, there's a rule in the CIA that contractors cannot have private offices, right? And contractors cannot manage staff employees. So one day, these 2 strangers show up in the counterterrorism center, and 2 branch chiefs are told to move out of their office so these contractors can move in. I said, "What the heck, contractors?" I said to a psychologist that I worked with in the counterterrorism center, I said, what psychologists get private offices? They're not allowed to have private offices. She said, "I have no idea, but these guys have some wasta. They're important, whoever they are." They were James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen. Now, they had been longtime contractors with the Department of the Air Force, and they had reverse engineered the SEER training program. That's the training program that we give pilots to be prepared in case they're shot down over enemy territory and they're captured. So they have to go through, waterboarding and gas attacks, and it's terrible. It's terrible. But they reverse engineered it so that we could use it on prisoners to break them rather than to use them on, American pilots to try to get them to not break.
Did they have any experience in interrogations, Mitchell and Jessen?
No. See, that's a really important point here. Mitchell and Jessen had no experience whatsoever in interrogations. What their experience was something that they called learned helplessness. And they wanted the prisoner to just burst into tears as soon as they walked into the room because the prisoner was so fearful of what was coming. That's learned helplessness. But they had never interrogated anybody. And indeed, at the CIA, we were not trained in interrogation. There was no class you could take on how to interrogate a prisoner because it was the FBI that was supposed to interrogate. Remember, in 2002, when this was all taking place, 9/11 was still an open criminal investigation. And so even though we were overseas, the FBI was supposed to have primacy. But instead, there was this bureaucratic, pissing match between FBI and CIA over who got to be the boss. And that primacy kept shifting between the 2. Well, as soon as the CIA took over, they deployed Mitchell and Jessen to implement this torture program.
Was there any evidence that this learned helplessness would cause a person to confess? Like, what was the evidence that it worked?
There was none.
Did they make a lot of money, those 2?
They made $108 million. Later on, they said that was not true. They only made $94 million. But yeah, they got rich and they live in giant mansions on the Gulf of Mexico now outside of Tampa.
My God. I I actually I talked to a I represented a Gitmo detainee beginning in 2008, and I worked with these folks in New York, the Center for Constitutional
Oh,
Rights.
they're great. Yes.
Yeah, and I talked to one of my colleagues today, and I asked him about it because I knew you were coming on, and so I asked him about Abu Zubaydah, because he still represents. I think there's 15 people left or 17 people left in
17. Yes.
Gitmo. And Abu Zubaydah is still there. He's
Yep.
never been charged with a crime.
No. And was never a member of Al Qaeda, by the way. We had been lied to by the Bush administration. He was not the number 3 in Al Qaeda. And besides not being the number 3, he had never even joined Al Qaeda.
So, John, I want to ask you about Al Qaeda. So, I mean, but I don't think this is the right point to do it. But let's see if we can get that in later. But so it's 2007. You did this interview with ABC News, and you said all hell broke loose. But you weren't really. They didn't come after you until 2012. It was Obama who came after you, not
That's right.
Bush. So
That's right.
what happened in the intervening 5 years? Nothing, or were you?
Oh, no, that's a great question. So I gave the interview on something like December 11th, I think it was, 2007. And the very next day, the CIA filed a crimes report against me with the FBI, saying that I had revealed classified information. The Bush administration's FBI investigated me from December of 2007 to December of 2008, and then determined that I had not committed a crime. There's a law in this country, believe it or not, that says that it is illegal to classify a crime for the purpose of keeping the crime from the American people. Torture's a crime. So you can't make it top secret because you can't classify a crime. So they sent my attorneys what's called a declination letter, declining to prosecute me. And my wife and I went out to dinner that night to celebrate. I thought it was over. 3 weeks later, Barack Obama becomes president. John Brennan, who's one of the fathers of the torture program, becomes Obama's deputy national security advisor for counterterrorism. And Brennan asked the Justice Department, Eric Holder was the attorney general, to secretly reopen the case against me. So I had no idea that for the next 3 years, my phones were tapped, my emails were being intercepted, teams of surveillance were following me everywhere I went. As it turned out, they even followed us into church on Sunday, and they would sit directly behind us in the pew behind us and pretend to be Greek Orthodox. It got so bad. I was working for John Kerry at the time on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but it got so bad that in 2011, I got a call from a Japanese diplomat who invited me to lunch. That was one of the things that I loved about that job, was getting to interact with foreign diplomats, just like I had done overseas. And so I went to lunch with this diplomat. We went to a restaurant on Capitol Hill. And at the end of the lunch, he said to me, "So what's next for you?" And I said, actually, I think I'm going to resign soon. I promised Senator Kerry that I would give him 2 years. It's been 2.5. I said, I need to make some money to put my kids through school. I think I'm going to go back into the private sector. And very excitedly, he says, "No, if you give me information, I can give you money." And I said, "The fuck is wrong with you?" I said, "You know how many times I've made that pitch?" I said, "Shame on you. I'm going to report this." And I went directly, and I mean without stopping, to the office of the Senate Security Officer. And I said I was just pitched by a foreign intelligence officer. So he told me to sit at this standalone computer, write it out as a memo, and he was going to courier the memo to the FBI. So I did. And the next day, he called and said the FBI wanted to see me. They were going to send 2 agents up to interview me. Now, this Japanese diplomat, his English was so bad that we did all of our conversation in Arabic. And they came up to interview me, and they said, "Here's what we want you to do. We want you to call him back, invite him to lunch, and try to get him to tell you what information he's looking for, and how much he's willing to pay for it. And because I'm a patriot, I said, you want me to wear a wire or something? And they said, no, we'll be at the next table. So I said, okay, he doesn't speak English, but okay, if that's what you want to do. So they called me the morning of that second lunch, and they said that something had come up, but that I should go forward with the lunch and just write them another memo. So I did, and then they asked me to do that a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time, which I did. So at the fifth lunch, he told me that he had just been promoted, that he got his dream job. He was going to be the number 2 at the Japanese embassy in Cairo. I told him, congratulations. I shook his hand, and I never saw him again. A year later, I've been arrested, and the Justice Department sends us 15,000 pages of classified discovery. And in this discovery, we find two things. We find a series of memos from John Brennan to Eric Holder and back. Brennan says, charge him with espionage. And Holder says, my people don't think he committed espionage. And then Brennan says, charge him anyway and make him defend himself. And they did. They charged me with 3 counts of espionage. They waited until I went bankrupt, and then they dropped the espionage charges. But then we also found that there was no Japanese diplomat. He was an FBI agent trying to get me to commit actual espionage, to take money in exchange for classified information. But I kept reporting the contact back to the FBI. And so they finally wrote a memo saying we should end this operation. He's clearly not going to take the bait. I was so upset by that. I wasn't even as upset about Brennan and his memo. I was upset that they would run this phony diplomat against me. And I said to my lead attorney, Plato Kacharis, who was a legendary figure in Washington legal circles, I said, why would they do that? I am a patriot. And he said, because they have a shit case and they know it's shit and they're trying to frame you. And so we elected to fight.
Well, the FBI has been known for entrapment cases. There's a Gretchen Whitmer case. There were plenty of
Right.
so-called terrorists who were just troubled people who were enticed into agreeing with what the FBI was trying to get them to say or do. So that's what seems to be a tool in their toolkit.
And you know what's happened in the meantime? In the intervening years, as recently as 6 months ago, I've received emails from 3 of the FBI agents on the case apologizing to me and saying that they knew it was political from the beginning, they didn't want to do it, but that the orders had come from the very top and that they were very sorry.
So you embarrassed, but here's the political part that doesn't really make sense to me. So you embarrassed the Bush administration, and the Bush administration was desperate to get information and to solve this issue that they had. And so they were willing to try anything, break any rule, and they said so. And so, but that was that administration. Now in comes Obama saying that I'm going to put an end to all that. And he specifically ran on ending things like torture that you had revealed. So why is the Obama administration coming after you, given that they came in with a mandate to stop all that kind of
Right.
stuff and turn the page on it?
I'm smiling because we like to convince ourselves, to try to convince ourselves that there are, that of our 2 parties, one is a right-wing party and one is a left-wing party. And really, we have a right-wing party and then we have a farther right-wing party. The answer to your question is severalfold. Number one, the entirety of Barack Obama's experience in government was 2 years as a U.S. Senator. 2 years. He didn't have the foggiest idea how to be president of the United States. Number 2, he made the unfortunate, unforced error of relying on the likes of John Brennan, whom I consider to be a war criminal, for his expertise in intelligence. Number 3, he had a Nixonian obsession with national security leaks. Obama did. Nixonian in its ferocity. And
do you think that came from Brennan?
I was just going to make the final point. It came from Brennan. Obama had never accumulated, acquired any intelligence experience. And Brennan convinced him from the outset that if you really want to make a name for yourself, you have to stop these leaks. Well, in fact, it's the White House that leaks like a sieve. Those leaks are okay, especially when it makes the administration look good. But and look at it this way. I love this statistic. The Espionage Act was written in 1917 to combat German saboteurs during the First World War. Between 1917 and Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009, 3 Americans were charged with espionage for speaking to the media. Just during the Obama administration, 8 people, 8 whistleblowers were charged with espionage for speaking with the media. And in many cases, espionage is a death penalty case. For me personally, I was facing 45 years in prison. And indeed, that was the Justice Department's initial offer to me. There was a horrible, horrible woman involved in my case who ended up being the Deputy Attorney General for the Criminal Division under Joe Biden. And she said, "Take the 45 years, Mr. Kiriakou, and you may live to meet your grandchildren." That's what she said to me.
What was her name, just so we know?
Ugh, you know what? I don't even want, and you can find it in a second. I don't even want to speak her name. I don't even want to speak her name. She doesn't deserve the publicity. Monster.
Could you talk a little bit about, well, 2 questions. First, you mentioned that there were, I think, 8 total espionage prosecutions. And of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of these prosecutions were of whistleblowers, not actually people that were selling secrets
Correct.
to another country.
And there were a couple of those, but I'm only talking about whistleblowers. There were 8 whistleblowers, and I think there were 2 or 3. One was working for China, one was working for South Korea, something like that. So yes, you're exactly right.
And did you end up having any sort of support group or working with any of these other or helping support, or they supporting you, these other whistleblowers?
Oh.
Is there any that you want to just mention?
Oh, I would love it. Thank you for that question. And I'll preface my answer by saying when something like this happens to you, you become positively suicidal, right? They're throwing words at you like death penalty and 45 years and your life's over. I was almost 50 years old when this happened, and I'm looking at 45 years. I'm going to die in a steel bunk somewhere. So the first person who approached me was a former Justice Department attorney by the name of Jessen. Jessen had been the director of ethics at the Justice Department. She became a whistleblower in her own right, and then not only was forced out of her job at the Justice Department, but she was put on the no-fly list and accused of being a terrorist sympathizer. And what was her crime? Her crime was to tell the FBI when they captured John Walker Lind, the American Taliban, in Afghanistan, to be sure to read him his rights. That was an unforgivable, unpardonable sin to tell the FBI, be sure to read him his rights before you interrogate him. And so they tried to get her bar license revoked. They put her on the no-fly list. It was a mess. Anyway, Jessen was the first, and her deputy at the Government Accountability Project, it was called, GAP. They immediately introduced me to Tom Drake, who was an NSA whistleblower and quite an important one, who in turn introduced me to Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe, and Diane Rourke, Diane being from the House Intelligence Committee. They were all whistleblowers. And then the great Daniel Ellsberg, who became one of the most important mentors in my life. A man who became as important, almost as important to me as my own father was. And so it's funny, we extended that circle to Jeffrey Sterling, the CIA whistleblower, to Daniel Hale, the drone whistleblower, to a series of FBI whistleblowers and IRS whistleblowers. And, we ended up with this community because the FBI in my case, the CIA, the White House, the Justice Department, they're going to leak lies about you to the media, and they're going to turn the jury pool against you. It's what they do. It's like they can't help themselves. And so you can't get through this alone, or you can't get through it just with your attorneys. You have to be surrounded by people who understand, like legitimately understand what it is that you're facing. And so we've created our own community. We brought, Ed Snowden into it a little bit later, although it's, as you imagine, it's a little bit tougher to be in touch with Ed. But I'm not sure I could have made it through without support from those people. They were giants in my life.
I've heard you talk a little bit about the prosecution and how they ended up turning your own wife against you. I don't want to put you through all that, and we have a limited time, but I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the game that they play, the CIA and the government, with classifying information and then
Right.
making you sign security agreements. And this is something because I had to do as representing a Guantánamo detainee, and I had nothing like what you went through, but I was I had basically I had written an article in a paper about the fact that they were classifying information above my security clearance level, so that I couldn't see it and I couldn't defend my client.
Yep.
And they basically they revoked my security clearance, and I had a
Of
wonderful
course.
lawyer from Center for Constitutional Rights and also a former U.S. attorney that represented me pro bono and got my security clearance back so I could see my client released back to Afghanistan. But what I learned about this was eye-opening, to say the least, about the whole game. But when you sign these security agreements, you're basically agreeing. Now, you had mentioned earlier that there's a law that says they can't classify their own crimes
Right.
to protect them. But in fact, the security agreements do not have any exception. You're not allowed to reveal. Once you sign this and say, okay, if you want to see classified information, you have to sign this security agreement. But once you sign it, there's no exception. So if you then see evidence of a government crime that you want to disclose, you can be prosecuted under that security agreement. Can you talk a little bit about the agreements that you had to sign as a CIA officer and leaving the
Oh,
CIA?
sure. Sure. I signed more security agreements and secrecy agreements than I can recall. I remember signing one at one time, or I'm sorry, 6 at one time related to the invasion of Iraq. Those have all been declassified now. But you're right. They play games with classifications. J. William Leonard, who was the Bush administration's classification czar, has become an anti-classification activist, saying that most of what we have classified should not be classified in the first place. We have mandatory declassification laws that are routinely ignored by the CIA and by other agencies. And it's funny. I was smiling when you said that they would classify things above your level of clearance, because they do, and that's also improper. For example, something should never be classified at the top secret level unless it involves special methods like electronic intercepts, for example. If we're talking about human intelligence, somebody said something, somebody reported something, that is by its nature secret. And you should have been well above secret. So for them to classify something above your level of clearance, to me, that's a criminal act. That should never have been allowed to happen. And I'll add one other thing. When John Kerry hired me as the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I took that job very, very seriously. And he promised me, when he interviewed me for the job, that I would have access to anything I needed and I would have the freedom to report on anything I wanted. That was a lie. What he should have said is, you can't work on anything that might embarrass the Obama administration and stand in the way of me becoming Secretary of State. That's what he should have said, because that was the reality. But
So I take it John Kerry didn't come to help you once.
I emailed him and I said, Senator, please, I'm begging you. I have 5 children. Please ask the president to commute my sentence. The conviction would still stand, but I would be able to work and put food on the table for my family. And he emailed me back and he wrote, please do not ever attempt to contact me again. And that was the entirety of the email. So when I was working for him, I told him that I had been called by a human rights activist who offered up a source who said that he had been present at what has become known as the Dasht-i-Leili massacre in northern Afghanistan on November 30th and December 1st of 2001. 2,000 Taliban soldiers just gave up en masse to the Northern Alliance. And the Northern Alliance called us and said, what do we do with these people? And we said, put them on trucks and take them out into the desert so we can divide them up and then send them to jails around the country, because there was no jail in Afghanistan that could hold 2,000 people. So they put them into containers, but they never put any air holes, and they never gave them food or water. 2,000 people. Of the 14 who survived what was called the box up, one of the survivors told us that the bodies fell out like sardines from a can. So 14 survivors out of 2,000 people. And this new source that was being offered to me, I met him in an empty classroom at Johns Hopkins University with the lights off so nobody would notice us.
What year is this, John?
This is 2009. He told me that he had been 12 years old at the time. He witnessed the box up. He was hiding behind a boulder, and there were 2 men there wearing black t-shirts and blue jeans and speaking English. Well, who is going to be in northern Afghanistan on December the 1st, 2001, in a black t-shirt and blue jeans and speaking English, but one of a dozen CIA colleagues of mine? So I wrote a letter to the CIA asking for clarification, and I used the auto pen to sign Senator Kerry's name, with his permission, of course, and I sent it to the agency. About 6 weeks pass, and one of my colleagues walks into my office and he said, hey, the agency responded to your letter. I said, I didn't see any response. I just checked my mail an hour ago. I hadn't received anything. He said, no, they classified it top secret, and it's in the Senate Security Office. Well, I only had a secret security clearance at the time because they were delaying my clearance because they were trying to charge me with espionage, which I didn't yet know. So I said, what did the letter say? And my colleague said, it said, go fuck yourself. And I said, okay, that's how they want to play it. So I flew to Afghanistan. It's a legitimate investigation. And I went to Dasht-i-Leili, and I went to the site of the box up. There are still human bones sticking out of the sand with weathered clothes still hanging on them, femurs, ribs, skulls, just laying in the dirt. So I came back. I start writing my report, and Senator Kerry comes to my office and he said, what about this Dasht-i-Leili thing you're doing? I said, yeah, I mean, we have him dead to rights. And I said, besides, President Obama said during the campaign that if elected, he's going to release all the Dasht-i-Leili documents, which he never did. And Kerry said, listen, you're going to have to kill this investigation. And I said, come on now. I just got back from Afghanistan. I have pictures. I have first-person documentation. And he said, you're not listening to me. I want you to kill the investigation. And so I killed it. Wow. Let me add, John Kerry is no friend of human rights. John Kerry is no friend of openness or transparency in government. He's a neocon, just like the Dick Cheneys of the world, and the Democratic Party should be ashamed of him not trying to field candidates in his image.
You know, John, one of the things we don't talk about maybe enough is something that they used to call blowback. I don't know if you ever read, Chalmers Johnson wrote
Absolutely
wonderful books about
I have it here behind me.
And there was just recently an incident in Washington D.C. You probably know what I'm talking about. These two National Guards that were
Yes.
shot by an Afghan national that was in the United States with asylum, political asylum, and it turns out, and this is one of the rare times that the New York Times actually did a report that sort of revealed, I think it was going to come out anyway. So the New York Times or the
Right.
CIA basically wanted to get on top of it. But
Yes.
he had
Agreed.
worked for a unit called, I'm not sure if this is something, it was called the Zero Unit,
Zero.
which was trained and funded by the CIA,
Yes.
which was apparently a death squad
Right.
in Afghanistan, where they were sent night raids into people's homes if they were suspected of being part of the Taliban or collaborating with the Taliban, executing people. And as a apparently, according to the article in the New York Times, said that a friend of his, a childhood friend, had said that yes, he was incredibly disturbed by the work that he did. I think this guy was only 5 years old at the time of 9/11, so he was a young man, and he joined this unit as a young man, and apparently it caused psychological damage to the point where he ended up killing two National Guards. And obviously, that's not the first blowback incident. I mean, we can go back to 1953 and
That's right.
the
MK Ultra.
CIA and British intelligence, um, the regime change operation, getting rid of
Iran.
Mossadegh
Hmm.
on behalf of British oil,
Hmm.
and the blowback decades. The U.S. embassy in Iran, hostages taken, all these things. We don't talk about this enough, and it's usually covered up. Um, is that something? Can you talk a little bit about some of the consequences of some of these crimes? I see like you've talked about this, and the government seems to spend a lot of energy covering up the
Yeah.
crimes of the CIA.
Covering up rather than trying to treat these things at the root. Uh, it was my experience at CIA. I was there for 15 years. It was my experience that almost no thought ever went into blowback or the potential for blowback. And I always believed that was very, very dangerous. There's an enormous office at the CIA called OMS, the Office of Medical Services. And it's divided, between medical and psychological and psychiatric, and they have sociologists and anthropologists and just an army of PhDs and PhD MDs. And either nobody listens to those people, nobody cares what they have to say, or they're all incompetent. And I doubt that that's the case. But nobody really cares to even bother planning for the possibility of blowback. It's almost like invading a country. It's easy. I just said this earlier today to a friend of mine. It's easy to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. The hard part is what you do next.
Mhm.
Right.
Well,
Well,
if you're recruiting people to be members of death squads, and you think, it's not going to take a psychological effect on them. It's not going to bother them to just commit cold-blooded first-degree murder, on a daily basis just because we want them to, murder friends and family members and tribal, elders and whatever have you. And we just hope for the best. Well, what they say in business school, hope is not a strategy. You can't just hope for the best in a case like that.
Well, you have to wonder too. I mean, at that point, when when you're running death squads around a country, what are you actually trying to accomplish at that
Yeah.
point? But getting back to my earlier question about Al Qaeda, and that is blowback, right? Al
Yeah,
Qaeda
sure.
was a CIA operation to cause pain to the Soviet Union,
Yeah,
right?
Al
So
Qaeda was the blowback. Yes, a
and
lot of
so
people believe that the CIA created Al Qaeda. That wasn't the case. I guess you could argue that it accidentally created it, or it was created by the effects of the anti-Soviet war in Afghanistan. My mentor at the CIA was Gus Avrakatos, who became legendary at the CIA, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman in the film Charlie Wilson's War. All Gus ever wanted to do, and all he ever talked about, was killing Russians. That's all he wanted to do, kill as many Russians as he possibly could. And if that meant arming these these Islamic maniacs, well, whatever the blowback would be, we'll handle it then when it presents itself. Well, the way it presented itself was Al-Qaeda formed. And then when we started killing the Al-Qaeda people, ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda. ISIS was created in an American military prison in Iraq. Why? Because Al-Qaeda wasn't radical enough. And then we had that to deal with. Now Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and Al-Qaeda in the Sahel. Where does it end?
Do you think that Al-Qaeda is completely separate from the U.S. government, or do you think that there's a
Oh,
connection?
yeah. Well, yes and no. Listen, I'm going to give you an educated guess here. So the new president of Syria, former member of Al-Qaeda, one of the co-founders of ISIS, yet that's the guy that we choose to be the leader of Syria.
Well, that is odd, isn't it? A man who has
A
personally
little
chopped people's
odd.
heads off.
Yes, a little
It's
bit
not
odd.
present.
He was just welcomed at the White House.
And welcomed at the White House. And I'll tell you another thing. The assistant secretary of state for the Near East, Barbara Leaf. Barbara and I were junior officers together, and I always thought she was great. And then I see that she's going to Syria with the special envoy for hostage negotiations to meet the new president. And then President Trump, at the same time or within days of their visit, is in Riyadh, and then just unilaterally announces a lifting of sanctions. Syrians were literally dancing in the streets. How did that come to pass? The only thing I can conclude is that he was probably a CIA asset. He was probably reporting on ISIS, or probably reporting from Al-Qaeda against Bashar al-Assad. Either way, there absolutely had to be some kind of a relationship with the CIA. Because the way this guy just came out of the woodwork and became the new president of Syria and is feted at the White House, it otherwise doesn't make any kind of sense.
Well, right. They start just what we were talking about with their entrapment operations. They start fires in order to put out the fires and then get credit for putting out a fire that they started.
That's exactly right.
And so here it is. They've got this asset, and he ends up being president of Syria after he's no longer useful as a sort of quote unquote freedom fighter against.
That's right.
Against Assad. So, but let me ask you a question about a sort of big picture and naive question about the CIA. What is it all for? Sometimes when I watch even spy thrillers these days, and it's the English against the Russians, and they're like, well, we got to keep those Russians from getting this information. It's like, why?
Right.
What's
Yeah.
the difference? It's like, you're just two European countries. Who cares if you get it? So what is this for? It's like someone else said this, and I thought it was an astute comment, that back in the day, when people used to say what's good for General Motors is good for America, U.S. foreign policy was about promoting the interests of corporate America, because at the end of the day, corporate America hired a lot of Americans. But since the Obama administration, maybe the Clinton administration, American companies, multinational corporates, don't care about Americans at all. They'll put Americans out of work to find someone cheaper anywhere else. So, but yet our foreign policy is to benefit whom exactly? Why are we knocking over Syria to get their resources? Who gets them? And how does that benefit me, you, any other American citizen? What is the CIA after? What is the policy of this country?
I'm not sure the CIA knows really what it's after. I think that we've transitioned into this odd foreign policy mindset where we're good, everybody else is either bad or potentially bad. And so whatever we do is good because we're the good guys. We don't have to have a policy in Syria other than our guy should be running Syria. We don't need to have a policy on Iran other than that Iran is bad. Iran is friendly with China and Russia, and so we should seek to overthrow the Iranian government. So, the bottom line for me is I honestly don't see the need for a CIA. It took me a little while to get there, but look at it this way. You're going to need intelligence for military support. Of course you will. But that's what DIA does, and that's what all the uniformed intelligence services do. Army has an intelligence service, Navy, Air Force, everybody has an intelligence. Even the Coast Guard has intelligence. So that's covered. If you need analysis, I'll tell you what, the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research did better analysis than the CIA did. When I was a CIA analyst, I had such great respect for the State Department's analytic unit. Science and technology, oh my God, DARPA, NSA, private industry, right? So do we really need a CIA Directorate of Science and Technology? Everything that the CIA does, somebody else also does. Human intelligence. There's a DoD agency called DHS, Defense Human Services, Defense Human Intelligence Services. And what do? They do exactly what the CIA does. They recruit spies to steal secrets. So why do we have all these extra layers of intelligence just sitting one on top of each other? You know, it's not unusual it's normal, I should say, for countries to have a foreign intelligence agency and a domestic intelligence agency, right? They have a version of the CIA and a version of the FBI. We have 18 separate intelligence agencies in government. 18. Why is there an intelligence officer at the Department of Education or the EPA or the Department of Commerce?
Well, John,
what is that?
You know, one of the things that maybe we could end with is the original papers that established the CIA in the 40s, I guess, with Truman.
47.
It was just an intelligence gathering agency.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. You know what? I would actually encourage people to read the National Security Act of 1947. It's not terribly long, but it established the CIA. And you're exactly right. It was just to keep the country safe. You know, you remember, who was it? Was it George Washington? It was one of the early founding fathers who said that gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mail. And by 1947, we came to the conclusion that, yeah, actually they do. But it was never supposed to be this out of control, you know, with tens of thousands of employees all over the world, embedded in every layer of government. It was never supposed to be something like this. And we know it wasn't because
running it, who's a sociopath who not only recommended a specious charge against you that he knew wouldn't hold up in court, who ended up deeply involved in the Russiagate hoax.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it was.
That's what they're producing.
You're 100% right.
Helps, you know, Americans live a better life.
That's
Maybe
right.
If they are, I don't see where it is.
You're 100% right. And I think little by little, Americans are coming around to that understanding. I will say one thing politically. I've never believed that the ideological spectrum is a straight line from left to right. I believe it's a circle. And it's a different circle depending on the issue. And on this issue, I think that the progressive left and the MAGA right are in agreement. The CIA is a dangerous force. It's un-American, and it needs to be addressed.
People are afraid. People are afraid to say
that they are.
I mean, you know, the famous comment from Schumer that, like,
yeah,
you know, Trump's a
they
fool.
have 9 ways from Sunday to get you.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably a good place to end, John. I know you've got a hard stop.
Yeah, you do.
We really
thank you. It was a real pleasure.
It's an amazing story, and we'd love to hear more of it. I mean, you've got so much knowledge about what's happening, and you know.
Thank you.
There's lots of people who are hungry for what you know, and that's why you have such a huge following now on social media. Where can
I've been fortunate. Thank you.
Hear more from you.
I've got a couple different things. I'm on YouTube with 2 podcasts. One is called Deprogram, which I do every day with Ted Rall. And then there's one called Deep Focus I do once a week. It's a much more in-depth interview, usually with somebody in foreign policy or professors or activists or attorneys. And then I do one on Apple Podcasts called Dead Drop, What Makes a Spy Tick? And we talk about a lot of these issues. And then, of course, Facebook and Instagram and X and all the usual places.
Terrific.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on. Please like and subscribe to our program. And we hope to have you back, and we'll talk soon, John.
Thanks.
About,
some other things.
Together.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you both.
Yeah, good to see you, John. Take care.
Thank you.